the journey to wholeness is an individual, it's a personal journey because it's a decision. It's like for me, I was like, I don't want to live toxic. I don't want to live dysfunctional. I don't want to live in unhealthy patterns. I had to realize what loving myself meant. It meant that how I am, who I am, what I am is good enough for God and it's good enough for me. Part of that is just reminding ourselves that we can't change the past and we must leave the past in the past.
Greetings, y'all. Welcome back to Living Once Twice, the place where we rewrite narratives, reinvent ourselves, and reimagine our lives. Thank you all for tuning into today's episode. Before we dive in, please be sure to subscribe, leave us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Also giving us a follow on Instagram at Living Once Twice, where you can view more great content, including information on all of our guests, like the guest that we're bringing on today, which is Landis Graden. Landis is a successful entrepreneur, author, father, and also founder of DCG Strategies that focuses exclusively on providing real estate consulting and development solutions for community to benefit organizations such as faith-based entities, public school districts, and nonprofit. Landis also sits on the board of Covenant House California and Oakland Exchange. Author of his memoir, which we're going to touch on today, Bent Not Broken, Landis uses his own stories of hardships and battles to encourage all people, but particularly men, who have fallen victim to strong stereotyping, to lean into the idea of vulnerability and continuous healing. Landis, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, man. Thanks for having me. Thank you for the invitation. I'm excited about the conversation. It's a good day, man.
Thank you.
How are you?
I'm good. We're rolling with the punches on the technical difficulty side, but we're going to make it happen. So it's on a Feel Good Friday. But Landis, I always like to give the audience context of how I came to learn of your work. And I was really grateful getting invited to a panel that one of our previous guests, Naeem Hopkins, invited me to. And I found myself just nodding along to a lot of the journey of yours that you were sharing, that other men were sharing. And so I think today's conversation is going to be very powerful about everything from path to healing to the different masks that we all wear and accumulate on our lives. But then also you give a pathway to how do we heal that? How do we get back to our authentic self? I think that's really going to have an impact on a lot of folks. And so in the book, one of the places that you start is you walk us through an important moment for you at the White House. And so I would love for you to just share with our audience a little bit more about that moment. Can you take us back to that moment and why that served as such a turning point for you?
Yeah, I can remember it like it was yesterday. So this was when Obama was president, and I was invited along with others to the White House. It was a convening of some of the leading social entrepreneurs in the country, and I'm a social entrepreneur. And what we were doing was, sharing what we thought were great community reinvestment opportunities, ideas, some brainstorming, et cetera. And, I'm in the room with all these, people came from all over the country, people at the top of their game. I felt really humbled and honored to be amongst that group. But early on into the session, I started feeling out of place. I started feeling like I didn't belong. I started feeling doubt, worry, fear, and like there was a mistake. Like, I can understand why they're here, but I'm not supposed to be in this room. And I started owning that feeling, and it just came over me. And, it really was messing with me in my emotions and my self-esteem and my confidence. A little bit longer into the day, as I started sharing and talking and networking, then I realized, I do belong. These people are smarter than me. And I felt like, I can hold my own really strongly in this room. So I kind of regained my footing. But what I learned was that was the first time that I really was able to identify imposter syndrome, which really meant that I never felt that I belonged in the rooms that I was in, even if I earned my way. It was this nagging sense of I'm not good enough. And why that was such a riveting moment is because of where I was. And I felt so proud to be invited. And then all of a sudden I didn't feel like I belonged. And when I got home, I really wanted to examine that. I wanted to go into that deeper because it wasn't a good feeling. And it helped me understand, where that imposter syndrome might have been there all along. This was such a moment where I was able to see it clearly, and I didn't like it.
Thank you for taking us back to that
Yeah.
turning point for you, which is so odd because, like you said, you'd earned that moment to be there with everyone, and you kind of went through your own internal hero's journey of like kind of finding your footing again and be like, no, I belong. But you didn't just let that moment pass. You got
Right.
curious about it, and you got curious to kind of trace itself back. And I
Hmm.
know in the book, a part of that tracing itself back is you bring us back to like your childhood and your
Hmm.
upbringing. And
Hmm.
so if you don't mind, like as you started to do that unpacking, what was it as you look back at like your journey and your upbringing maybe contributed to some of that fear, that doubt, that not feeling good enough that you were feeling at that moment in the White House?
Yeah, I'll say the majority of, I'm just going to use any dysfunction that I had, any bad habits, unhealthy thinking patterns, etc. I can trace it pretty much almost most of it to childhood, right? I picked up some of it along the way, but most of it to childhood. And it's because I grew up in a very toxic environment. I had one of those fathers that was just the epitome of toxic masculinity. What that means is, his way of showing up in the world were just unhealthy thought patterns that he had inherited. So, when I look back on it, I know he was just reenacting what was given to him. And there's this. I can paraphrase it. Well, not paraphrase. I can kind of sum it up this way. There's this trauma-informed test. It's called ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences. Kaiser developed it as a way to measure childhood trauma and then what that impact has on grown-ups. What is the legacy of that? And, it's known, folks with ACEs are known to have shorter life expectancies, higher health disparities, and there's a whole list of just negative consequences. And and it's a 10-question test, you answer for each ACE, you get 1 point. So if you have 4 out of 10, then that's considered very serious, and they recommend therapeutic intervention because it's just that serious. I had 9 out of 10, so basically, I'm not supposed to be here, and so that's kind of sharing. That kind of sums up my childhood. Grew up around a lot of domestic violence, drugs and alcohol abuse, people in and out of jail that lived in a home, just all sorts of just chaos. And I'm very transparent in the book about that because that was the root of my unhealthy thinking. I grew up thinking life was one way, and I acted out of that, and that started me on I've developed some very unhealthy patterns that didn't serve me or the people around me as a result of that.
That's so profound for you to say of like you could trace it all back to childhood, but then as you were kind of taking this assessment, like you said, 9 out of 10, and the gravity of just that. But also, it reminds me of this quote that you have in the book that it's easier to build strong children than to repair like broken men, because
Mm-hmm.
it's something that speaks to me of like, wow, the impacts, whether parents realize it or not, of what's going on during that time frame, those chapters of life. It never leaves the child, and you have many children or adults who are
Mm-hmm.
still carrying that inner child, that wounded, those wounds, the
Mm-hmm.
emotional baggage into adulthood. And unless they do what you did, which is become curious about it, trace it back, and then want to go through a journey of healing it reminds me of another metaphor that you use in this book. They become meteors and
Yeah.
going through life, impacting other folks. And so, do you
Yeah.
mind like sharing more about that metaphor that you use of
Yeah.
meteors? Because that was
Yeah.
something that really stuck with me, and it's something that I think about it so often along my own journey as I'm trying to heal. And
Yeah,
I'm
yeah. So there's a saying, I can't remember who to credit it, but it's easy to Google. It's give me a child, give me a boy, and by the time he's 7, I'll tell you the man. Meaning from 0 to 7, that's all of the development. And really, most of our most of our subconscious programming happens by the age of 7. A lot of it happens by the age of 3. So we're having these things hardwired into our nervous system that we don't really even have control over. And so the notion of the meteor, or the metaphor that I used, was if you just take an innocent child who's born into the world, all a child's going to do when they're first born is eat, sleep, poop, and repeat. That's it. They have very short wake windows. They're 100% dependent on the outside world. They have no idea who even the outside world is. So as that child continues to age, it's nature and nurture. They're 100% the product of their environment. So although a child is innocent, if a child grew up in the type of environment that I grew up, then the innocence you get bumped into by other people's dysfunction, other people's toxicity, bumps into you as a child, and it rubs off. So if you could just imagine a child that is born pristine traveling through space, and then all these unhealthy people are knocking into the child as the child ages and changing the DNA of that child. And so that's why I use meteors, because there's this crash that happens. So it's not like, you're just very delicate in nurturing this child and setting up this healthy environment, which, is what I've done with my children, but it wasn't done for me. So the metaphor just really illustrates that when a meteor hits an object, it's physics and a whole bunch of other things, but the object couldn't control the crash because it was the meteor. And that's the same thing as children. We can't control the crashes that happen to us. We have to survive through them. So it was the metaphor to say it's easy to get off track because you have a coordinates, and if you get knocked, then you're off of your coordinates, right? And so if you look at like an angle, and if you're supposed to go this way, if I just get knocked off track just this much, just a little bit, the further I go, this line gets wider and wider, the longer it goes, right? Right now it's a narrower line, but the further it goes out, the wider that line, and then there's a chasm. So that's what the meteors do. That's the metaphor for people bumping into us that are unhealthy. They knock us off of our core path that we were designed to do.
A lot of times it's the adults in our lives, and I know through the book, and you kind of talk about some of the examples of just your dad, and I want to talk about that because you do talk about the value and the importance of a father. And there's a quote that I wanted to share with you. You say, fathers serve as a sacred role in the lives of their children.
Right.
They protect us, they cover us, they help us find our courage, confidence, and our esteem. So if a father fails at his job, everyone suffers. And so for you, as you think about your own father, as you were sharing, like, can you speak more about like that dynamic, what that dynamic was like for you growing up between you and your dad?
Yeah, and then and in science, science tells us those first few years are that nurturing from the mom, but then the father does kick in and provide that identity, the strength, the confidence, the things that the man provides for the children. And so in my case, growing up with a father who just wasn't even aware of his own toxic nature, just in his core, because it was just his identity, his masks. He wasn't able to instill in me healthy ways of thinking, healthy ways of showing up, how to navigate challenges, how to develop a healthy sense of self-worth. He wasn't there for that because he was very unhealthy. So all he can relate to me through his limited lens, which was informed by just his upbringing and then reinforced by his lifestyle. And so the reason that's an important point in the book is because the journey to wholeness, I won't call it healing, I'll just call it wholeness, because something is often missing if we feel like our lives are, if we're struggling in life, it's because we feel like we're lacking something. So I'll call it, we feel like we're missing something. So the journey to wholeness is an individual, it's a personal journey because it's a decision. It's like, for me, I was like, I don't want to live toxic. I don't want to live dysfunctional. I don't want to live in unhealthy patterns. But for me to shift into a life that I can be proud of, and one that leaves a positive legacy, and one that brings up healthy kids, meaning healthy spiritually, emotionally, physically, I had to make that decision myself. And so when the reason I thought it was important to show my father's patterns and how they impacted me is because I can't use that as an excuse, right? I can recognize it, I can see it, but I can't use that to justify how I show up in the world, which is what I did prior. Well, this is how I am, or I was raised like this, or this is just, leave me alone. Let me be me. Those are all excuses, right? And so it's part of my attempt to allow people to identify why you are the way you are. And if you're happy with it, great. But if you read my book or listening to this podcast, you likely want something more for yourself. So what I'm doing is I'm helping people really deprogram the negative that was placed in them, and even subconsciously that they don't even think is there, and then showing them a path to replace the negative with positive ways of thinking and positive habits and healthy perspectives about ourselves.
And I love how you talk about this. Like, okay, it becomes a part of our awareness as we go through and unpack it. But as you were sharing this story about like how you didn't develop healthy self-worth, it takes us back to that moment at the White House of how you
Right,
felt like an
right,
imposter, like you weren't
right,
worthy of being there.
right, right.
And we know many of us struggle with this. Like that's something
Mm-hmm,
myself in my journey of
mm-hmm,
seeking external validation. I don't
mm-hmm,
feel worthy, so I need to find it in my job. I need to find it in women. I need to find it in
mm-hmm,
social media metrics.
mm-hmm.
So I think it's something many of us struggle with. And so
Right,
as you kind of went along your journey, uh, like was there, because you didn't feel worthy and you weren't getting that fed to you,
right.
did you feel like whether it was a career paths or things that you were doing along the way, you were seeking that external validation outside of yourself? And yeah, was that like kind of causing you like conflict, inner
Yeah, yeah.
inner peace?
So there was tension there, but I didn't know it. So that's why that moment in the White House was so substantial.
Mm-hmm.
Because as you just pointed out, I had all the trappings of success materially. I actually had on an Armani suit. I don't remember the shoes. I know they were expensive shoes. I was staying at an expensive hotel. I was making lots and lots of money in a company that I owned. I had operated multiple businesses. I was much younger than I am now. So, I had all this success that made me feel good about myself. And what was significant about that moment was it was the first time something from the inside came out and said, "Hey, you're not successful." So, and matter of fact, you don't even belong. It was something from the inside that was suppressed. And that's what was substantial. It wasn't an intellectual exercise. It wasn't an egotistical exercise of, well, I can do better than that, or I can buy a fancier car that'll make me feel better because I'm getting attention. It was like something from the inside, this big void and this chasm opened up. And so it's almost as though mine was imposter syndrome, but the whole awareness that this external validation is not really me being in tune with my own self, my own sense of worth, because it became as I had to uncover it and learn that what I thought was success and the things that I allowed to sustain me emotionally, which was exhausting, because I always felt like I had to do more and more and more. I never felt enough. I had to make more money, date more women, buy a fancier car. It was like this never ending struggle to achieve, because the more I achieved, the more emotional feedback that gave me love and validation, but I could never enjoy it. It was like always fleeting. The more I did, the more I had to do. And I was just in this cycle of a vain accomplishment, if you will. And it wasn't peaceful because the stuff never really did. Because you get the car, you got to go buy another one. You date a girl, you got to go date another one. It was like it was always what's next, what's next, what's next. I never enjoyed my life. And I learned that, my father loved us through material. That was his way of showing love. He just buy us stuff, or, and we needed it or we wanted it, but it wasn't the investments into my soul. And so I learned that that's why I felt that way, is because I didn't feel good enough. And not feeling good enough was the root, for the most part, of any bad decision that I made as a young man. It was because I didn't feel good enough. And because I didn't feel good enough, I needed something external to make me feel better about myself.
Yeah, I think for a lot of us out there, that's a harsh awakening to realize, like, wow, I've been chasing something insatiable to fill a void that can never be filled by these, like you were saying, these external things, these materialistic things. And so I guess where I want to pivot to, Landis, is like, because now that you were having this awakening in yourself, how do you start to break that pattern? Because you've been programmed in this way to want to achieve, to want to seek, to want to build, create, and continue to accumulate. But now you're like, wait a minute, this is a broken pattern. I need to break it. What was the starting point for you to kind of rewriting that narrative for yourself?
You know, I had already been in therapy, but it wasn't. It was. I was dealing with superficial stuff. I wasn't dealing with those deep inner soul pains that I always felt, but I suppressed. Right. I never allowed myself to feel those deep levels of despair. I would just always push it down, but it was always there, trying to rise up. For me, I wanted peace. I wanted to live a life that was just peaceful. And I wanted to live a life that I didn't have to feel like I always had to constantly achieve. Wherever I happened to be, whatever station of life that I was in or am in, should always be good enough because I had to learn to live in the present. And so that the hardest part was acknowledging to myself that I don't love myself. And it wasn't something that was easily identifiable. I had to realize what loving myself meant. It meant that how I am, who I am, what I am is good enough for God and it's good enough for me, period. That I don't have to impress people to belong. That I don't have to prove to myself some external achievement to feel worthy. That I don't require someone outside giving me kudos to make me feel better about myself. And I wanted to be able to just stand in this is who I am and not have to work so hard just to exist. And so therapy became one of the most fundamental tools because what I wanted to learn in therapy was why I thought the way I thought and how do I unthink this stuff. So therapy was one tool. There's multiple tools, but it was like I wanted freedom from that. And it's so burdensome to constantly feel like I gotta keep chasing some external measurement. I wanted freedom from that. I just wanted peace in my mind, in my heart. And so that started me on the journey of understanding why I thought the way I did. So that's why I started with childhood. And then I was able to then identify those unhealthy patterns that I picked up that gave me those little payoffs along the way that made me feel good. And those unhealthy patterns and behaviors that also fed the mask that I wore. Because I got a lot of attention from wearing a mask, being successful, or the appearance of being successful, and having a good reputation, and having women attracted to me. All that made me feel good. So it's almost like I became addicted to the feeling of feeling good from others without not needing an addiction to just live my life and just live every day as though it's a fantastic day no matter what's happening.
Yeah, I love what you're saying here because with respect to something you started off by saying is like you had these feelings coming up before, and you said you were suppressing them,
Mm-hmm.
and the only way through was through. It wasn't like you were going to be able to go around it or take a shortcut through the painful parts.
Mm-hmm.
Someone listening who's feeling this, who knows that they don't got that peace inside, who knows that they like the freedom that they want, the love that they want. Like they know that it's right now they've been looking and searching for a lot of stuff outside of them, but there's this scary feeling of like, wait, I gotta go into like pain, and who wants to go into pain?
Yeah.
What would you tell them, Landis? Because like that's real. Who wants to feel uncomfortable? Who wants to admit that they don't love themselves? But to get to those hard truths, you gotta go through that.
Yeah, no, you do. And pain is a real thing because it's hard. But really what we're talking about is emotional pain, right? We're talking about the loss of expectations and how that makes us feel. At the end of the day, that's really what we're talking about. It's just taking a moment and just sitting with yourself and saying, do I have joy? That's the ultimate litmus test. Happiness and joy. And, joy is actually, for those of us that are religious, joy is a fruit of the spirit, whereas happiness isn't. I was doing things to keep me happy. And those things are always fleeting, and it's exhausting to stay happy. Once I was able to discover joy, it never leaves. It's like this renewable fountain that never leaves. It renews itself. And so it's first saying, am I just a person of joy? Google joy, research joy. It's a never ending source of peace, tranquility, and just, I feel great about who I am in the world. Even if I have some challenges that I'm going through, I'm still with joy versus being happy. I have to get the promotion, or I have to get the grade, or I need to buy the best gift for Valentine's Day, or I need this, or I need that, right? Or I need to, create something and become a millionaire. I need the car, I need the clothes, I need the girls. It's like, that's happiness. And, it's funny because I was, just yesterday I checked in with one of my former therapists. We were talking about just some emotional maturity. And we were talking about how when you reach a point of joy, we are able to rewire just our whole life perspective. And it's acknowledging that, how do I feel? Am I comfortable with just myself? If everything on my goals list that I have never happens, how does that make me feel? Right? And if I feel despair, if I feel fear, if I feel anything that's a negative emotion, disappointment's going to come and go. That's fine. But something dire, then that's a sense that I'm not on the right path. And so for someone struggling with, wow, I kind of sense that, I'm tired, or I'm worn out, or I want to quit, or it's just never enough, or I just can't quite get ahead. That could be an indication that, you're chasing happiness and not looking at joy. And the pain is really just accepting the loss of artificial expectations. And I don't even know where the pain comes from. I mean, I'm not a psychologist. I don't know where the pain comes from. All I can say is there's freedom on the other side. Right? And it's like, it's just it's stopping and just taking self-inventory. Do I have joy? Right? So I keep pausing for your questions because I don't want to just,
No.
keep going.
I love that where you're going. First, you're talking about a lot of these different pillars of, I think, just life that we don't talk about enough: joy, peace, freedom, love, self-love. Starting with these core things that we all get kind of swept away from shore because we just get adopted by the values of the outside world.
Right.
And you talk about, hey, sometimes the way back, it's going to be a little painful, but it's not physical pain. It's emotional pain that there's tools out there, there's support out there that can help us to kind of go through this process. And I know in the book, because you even talked about yourself of going to therapy, you did it before. And I appreciate when men come on here and talk about it, because I could see men saying, well, I've tried it before. You talk about the importance of going like deeper. It's not just going and showing up to therapy. It's actually like putting in work. So could you speak more about the importance of like how you show up to therapy? Because it's not all about just the talk. I know you explain how you got to deeper than that.
And I can even tie that to the pain we were just talking about, because oftentimes that pain, this is just my opinion, could be the result of unlived expectations. So my son, he's 15, and we work constantly on just what's important to you, Caleb. What do you want to do, Caleb? I'm not gonna project onto you what I think you should do. What are your natural gifts? And I'm constantly making sure that he has his own expectations instead of living up to my expectations. Where I'm going is, if you were raised to be a certain way, you're going to be people always use doctors and lawyers, they overuse it, but it's easy illustration. You're going to be a lawyer, but you're an artist. Then you grow up on this track that others programmed you to grow up, but it's not even who you are. So it's like departing from that there's a cost to that, because it could be ridicule, it could be people pushing you away, it could be rejection. So then when you go into therapy, putting in the work to me means it's having a vision of who you actually want to be for yourself. It's truly like, who do I want to be? Forget what the world wants me to be. Forget my gifts and talents for a moment, but who do I truly want to be? I don't want to be in a family business, or I don't want to do this, or I don't want to do that. I really want to be an artist, or I want to be an engineer, or I want to be a teacher, or whatever it is. Or I want to be the guy who's not easily upset. I want to be the guy who's not angry. I want to be the guy who's faithful to his partner. I want to be the guy who has good financial and habits and good physical habits. I want to be the guy who's always able to be a peacemaker instead of a fighter, or someone who has thick skin and not thin skin, right? There are things that we just truly want. So when we go to therapy, we have to hold the therapist accountable to helping us discover how to get there ourselves. Therapy could become codependent. You go in there, you talk, you share your problems, they commiserate, then you come back next week. What I'm suggesting is you walk in and say, listen, man or woman, I'm not happy. Just the life I'm living right now is not fulfilling by any means. I found myself in this dead end relationship. I don't like the job I'm in. I'm out of shape, or I want to stop smoking, or whatever, right? I always wanted I wanted to move overseas and be one of those tech people that just roam. I forgot what you call it. You know what I'm talking about, the Roman tech people. Whatever that is, and you work with your therapist to understand, how do you get there? What's the bridge to get there? Because once you cross the bridge, you don't need your therapist anymore at that level of intensity, right? So it's not just saying I was molested as a child and therefore I have unhealthy relationships with sex and with women, and it makes me a womanizer, or I'm bisexual and I don't want to be. And it's like we carry those type of things in, and then we're shamed because of that, and we feel guilty, and then we go into therapy and just talk about it, and it makes us feel better for that moment, but nothing really changes. And so for me, it's saying to people that really take this serious, is having a vision of who you really truly want to be. And to me, I'm a man of faith. I think God designs us all for a purpose. So for me, it's deeper than that. It's really, I want to be connected to my purpose. So, well, how do I know what my purpose is? Probably the thing you do for free for the rest of your life. If someone said, I will cover your shelter and your food and your clothes and your transportation and your entertainment for the rest of your life, but in exchange, you have to volunteer forever. It's whatever that thing you would do for free. That we all know it. It may not have been celebrated, but we all know it. So for me, therapy really ultimately is an opportunity to get us connected to our purpose. Because then part of that pain is taking on a new identity that, because at the end of the day, we're always, no, I shouldn't project, but a lot of people are afraid of rejection. They're not going to like me anymore. I built up this life and this persona, and this is what people are attached to. And if I shift, I'm going to be rejected by whoever it is that I care to not be rejected by. And I'm saying, well, the people who are supposed to be with you, if you're living in your purpose and you're full of joy, you will have your tribe. You will have your actual true tribe. And so it's hard for men to go to therapy because they don't want to be vulnerable. Therapy to me is wisdom. It's not weakness. It's we're okay with Steph Curry having a shooting coach. It's like, yeah, this is, hold your elbow this way, flick your wrist this way. That's fine. But we're talking about mental health coach, which is the most substantial part of our existence. You absolutely better get it. And anyone who ridicules it, they probably need it themselves.
Now that was well said, and especially that analogy that I know many men could relate, like a sports analogy. We would never shun someone getting a sports or a shooting coach or a
Right.
workout coach. But yeah, when we're talking about like mental health, and we really need to sustain ourselves, you're kind of like arm's length distance from it. And I appreciate that you talked about how there's these excuses, because we could easily get stuck in the muck of the
Mhm.
labels of the past, and use that to justify not taking any action. That is a fork in the road moment for so many people where it's like, yeah, these things happened. They were wrong.
Hmm.
You know, it happened
Hmm.
when you were a kid where you didn't have that agency over yourself. But now we're 20, we're 30, we're 40, we're 50. We have to take some ownership of it, and we can't no longer just continue
Hmm.
that story. We tell ourselves of, well,
Hmm.
you don't know what happened to me or what I've been
Hmm.
through. It's like,
Hmm.
yeah, the bad things did happen, but now we're in a
Hmm.
position where it's like we could take ownership of our
Hmm.
present and our future going forward.
Hmm.
And that
So
there's no
that's
that.
so that's another part of pain that I was going to get to was, for those of us that bad things actually did happen that were very traumatic, physically, emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, in a lot of cases. Those are very, very painful. That's physical pain at this point, right? And revisiting those wounds does bring back a flood of really hard to deal with emotions that some of us took a long time just to be able to scar over so that we don't have to feel that and that they didn't anchor us, right? But what I've learned is when we hold unforgiveness in our heart, we suffer the most. And for me, like my father was estranged, and I was really, really angry with him growing up because he wasn't there. And it really hurt my development because I was holding on to this anger of a man who was living his life. He wasn't angry, I'm angry. And so it's impacting my every single day existence. He's even if he I don't know if he's thought about me or not, but it wasn't impacting his day-to-day existence, at least I perceive it wasn't. Whatever someone did to us or whatever we did to someone else, we have to just sit and say, I forgive myself and I forgive them. Because at the end of the day, that preserves our ability to live our full life. And sometimes I know I held on to those wounds for a long time. And there's a burden that's just gets heavier and heavier and heavier holding on to whatever someone did to me. As I'm able to free that burden, because I'm carrying weight. Once I'm able to release that weight, now I can take on something that's much lighter, which is my life's purpose. I couldn't hold both. I can't be anchored by this weight of the past hurt and then hold the lightness of my purpose at the same time. And so it's the ability or the willingness to say, I choose me. And that's the difference. It's really the person choosing themselves. I'm gonna choose me, and the person's never gonna come to me and get down on their knees and beg for my forgiveness and make me feel better emotionally. They're not gonna do that. I have to get on my hands and knees and pray to God for forgiveness so he can fill my heart with joy. So I can leave that in the past because it already took enough from me. Those wounds robbed me enough. They robbed me the innocence of my childhood. I don't want them to continue to rob my adulthood too, because I'm waiting for forgiveness that is never going to happen. And Lord forbid the person passed away and you're still hurt. It's like there is freedom with just putting that stuff down because now you can soar with your purpose. So it's not easy to do, but if a person's willing to do, oh my God, the life that they can live is going to be ridiculously amazing.
I love that you talk about that forgiveness, both sides of it. The forgiveness of like others, but sometimes we find it really difficult to forgive ourselves for the way that we showed up, things that we missed the mark on. But you
Mm-hmm.
talk about like, hey, you can't wear that cloak of guilt and of
Mm-hmm.
shame because it will anchor you down. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's better to use those lessons
Mm-hmm.
to align with your purpose and to serve
Mm-hmm.
in a different capacity.
Mm-hmm.
Because those lessons are they're gifts now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they're the things that, like, for example, as I shared before we hopped on, like, I'm looking forward to taking a lot of my lessons and sharing it with like my son. And I know
Mm-hmm.
one thing that I learned from you, which was really powerful, was like you were like, yeah, I need use this analogy. And you're great at analogy. It was like you want to clean your closet so that
Mm-hmm.
like your kid doesn't find what's in your closet and put it on. And so I
That's
think
right. Yeah.
we all need to think about
Mm-hmm.
and remember as we're
Mm-hmm.
going through these journeys of being able to
Mm-hmm.
break these patterns, break
Mm-hmm.
generational curses.
Mm-hmm.
Part of that is that self forgiveness, so that we can
Mm-hmm.
take those lessons learned and create a new future for ourselves and our loved ones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So guilt and shame, they're decay, right? And
Mm.
so we have this moment right now to live. Today is our gift. We have this space. This is our life right now. And guilt and shame is our past robbing our present. That's all it is. So I can't fully embrace the fullness of today with the guilt and shame of yesterday. And I'm going to miss the gifts of today, which are designed for me to feel joy and happiness and to be able to contribute in a positive way. And it's not easy because it's like sometimes that guilt and shame gets kind of encoded in our brain, but it serves no purpose. It's truly just decay. And we have to cut it out and literally release it. In the Bible, God talks about, he throws our sin in the sea of forgetfulness. In life, we have to throw our guilt and shame into the sea of forgetfulness and not let ourselves or someone else use that to take joy from today. Because that's all we're doing. We're robbing today's joy from yesterday's kind of challenges or problems. And it's truly a mental exercise. If you ever watch high performing athletes, like the Olympics just ended, right? And if you watch the replays, especially so I'm gonna just pull out the women's gym, the track sprinters, the women's gymnastics. If you just go on and just watch the Gabby Douglas or the Simone Biles, you'll see them talking to themselves. You'll see they're giving themselves positive affirmations. And before I was watching Gabby Thomas, the other day I was just rewatching some of her sprints and she's talking to herself. You got this, girl. You can do this. You can do this, girl. You can see her lips. You can read her lips. It's the same thing that we have to do about guilt and shame. Landis, you're more than enough. Landis, you can't change yesterday. You can only embrace today. Landis, you can't take broken bricks from yesterday and build a new house today. You need new bricks today to build a new house. And it's like part of that is just reminding ourselves that we can't change the past and we must leave the past in the past. Eventually, we will develop the thought patterns where that stuff doesn't even come back into our present. But we have to be very intentional to remind ourselves the past is the past, past is the past, past is the past, past is the past. I'm good enough. I'm worthy enough, right? It's reminding us that I'm worthy enough. I love myself. I'm good enough. Whoever I was yesterday, I'm not that person today. The old man died. The new man reigns. It's not even convincing ourselves. It's allowing ourselves to continually communicate to ourselves those type of affirmations. You do that for 30 days, 45 days, 60 days, that stuff is gone. And then when other people bring it from the past, you're like, oh, yeah, that was that. When somebody reminds me of my past, I'm like, yeah, man, that was pretty terrible, wasn't it? Yeah, I don't know what I meant. That's where I'm at with it now. Yeah. I can literally, somebody can tell me the most horrendous thing I ever did. I said, man, I can't believe I did that. I can actually laugh at it now because I don't own it, right? There's a season. That's where I was going. The last thing I'll say about that is that was a chapter and that was a season. That wasn't for a lifetime. It only becomes a lifetime if I choose to hold it, right? Let yesterday's seasons be yesterday's seasons. I don't care what happened yesterday. It is what it is.
Yeah, but these are gems, Landis, of how you're talking about too, like how we got to become our own best friend here. The way that we talk to ourselves in our minds, because we're the quickest to criticize ourselves, so that we're down, to remind ourselves and pull ourselves backwards. It also talks about how, like, for some people they're afraid of, all right, I'm going to lose people in this journey. Of becoming or letting the mask go. But you talk about, you know what, your people are going to find you, your tribe is going to find you. And so before we go to each one, teach one, I want to talk about the power of community for you, because in the book, there's two men that you highlight that are really special, Mike and Ron. And it spoke about the importance of having positive male role models, influences, support systems. So anything you wanted to share about just their role in your life, but also just the importance of just having, or men having positive role models, community, and how that could also support their journey of just letting go of the masks that don't serve them.
Yeah, Mike and Ron were my two best friends from childhood. We grew up together. Mike passed away at 22. Ron passed away at 30. So it's been a while. I lost my best friends, but they were my positive. We lived life good and positive and fun. And that, that shaped my childhood, having these two close, they were my best friends. We were three best friends. And, I would be a different person if I hadn't had them around. Now, in regards to positive community or my tribe, yes, you are going to lose people. You will lose people, and but you're not going to lose the people who are supposed to be in your life. You're going to lose the imposters in your life. Um, when you're wearing your mask and you have this community, they're wearing their masks too, and they are disconnected from your purpose. And it's like many people have talked about the analogy with eagles and seagulls, right? But there's a pastor, his name was Miles Monroe. He's passed away. He talks about eagles. You may have heard it, but eagles don't fight with pigeons. They just keep going higher and higher. And the higher you go, the fewer people are going to be around you. And that's just, but the people that are around you are going to be so fulfilling that that's all you need. And so it's part of it is, why am I so attached to people who don't mean me any good? And the challenge is, and this is not to judge anyone. I'm not suggesting that you just go around and just tell everybody get away from me. But it's like, is this person that's in my life serving my better good? Is this person in my life lifting me up when I need that uplift? If this person in my, Jay-Z said this. He said, because people, talk about all the hits that Jay-Z writes, and he talked about in one of his interviews, he writes just as much bad songs as he does good songs. But his friends tell him, man, that's up. You better not put that out. He has people around him that be like, man, your breath stink. I want people around me to tell me, you got a booger in your nose, Landis, your breath stinks before you get on stage. And I don't want people that are going to let me go out there because they want to see me fail. And as we're going through this transformation, and if we're afraid to lose people, if you're afraid to lose people, that's an indication that you could have the wrong people around you anyway. Because the people that love you don't care. And the people that care don't love you. And I live by that. People that love you are going to be with you. I don't care what you go through. They are there with you. If you make the biggest mistake of your life, they're going to be right there with you. That friend can spot, like, man, what you do? Oh, man, they might cuss you out. All right, let's go fix it. Right? So the people that love you are always going to push you to be the best that you can be, even if they have to tell you the hard truth. So anyone that you're afraid to lose, there's a reason why you're afraid to lose them. They probably shouldn't be there in the first place.
That's some just great advice, and hopefully that gives people even more just inspiration of just knowing, like, during this season of their transformation, you're going to lose people, but
Mm-hmm.
the people who are meant to be there, who are going to ride or die with you, they'll be there on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
everything will kind of take care of itself there.
Mm-hmm.
So, Landis, the next chapter for us is our Each One Teach One section. So I got 4 fire questions for you.
Okay.
So got the first one, which is, Landis, what's one book or podcast that you would recommend that has been a game changer for you in your journey?
One is Atomic Habits book. The book Atomic Habits. It just talks about how to change habits. That's part of this journey. It's just healthy patterns, healthy habits. I don't think you can get anywhere without having habits that get you there. So that's one. A podcast is Oprah Winfrey's Super Soul Sunday. There are actually 2. One with Beckwith and one with Richard Rohr. And in particular, those are religious leaders, but they talk about the soul and the true self and the false self, and just it's like taking responsibility for yourself and not being ego driven, and recognizing when life isn't going the way you want it to go, that's just part of the journey, and learning how to embrace that and still thrive in the midst of darkness and chaos. Right? Just because you're in chaos doesn't mean life has to kind of be bitter. And so those 2 podcasts and that book, I think those would be my first things I'd recommend.
Right on. Those are great recommendations. So the next one, speaking of habits, what's one habit or practice for you that's been most impactful in your lifestyle design?
Yeah, outside of prayer, meditation, mindfulness meditation, because being present is everything. That our entire is being not living in the future, not living in the past, is living in the moment. So meditation, to me, has been a game changer.
Great. And that's a common one people talk about on the show often.
Yeah.
So next, we'll make you a policymaker. So if there's one law or policy that you could create that everyone would need to abide by, what would it be?
You must love yourself. And love yourself first. Wake up and love yourself. Go to bed, love yourself. That would be the law of the land. You have to love yourself. And if you don't love yourself, stay home until you figure it out.
I love how you doubling down on self-love.
Yeah,
It's impactful. We all come back to
Mhm.
ourselves and our hero's journey and find out that, wow, self-love is what I was missing
Yeah,
to
yeah,
really
yeah,
step into my person and become my true authentic self.
yeah.
And since this season's all about people's personal transformation of letting go of what no longer serves them, what's one limiting belief about yourself that was important for you to shed in order for you to become who you are today?
That I'm not good enough. That was the single most dysfunctional thought pattern that I had because it drove all of my bad decisions. The feeling of not feeling good enough or not being good enough made me pursue external validation. So once I was able to say I am more than enough and I love myself, I didn't need anything from the outside. So then I could just live in truth and purpose. That took me some years to get through that, but that was the one thing.
Thank you for that one. So, Lance, before we wrap up, like, what's next for you? Where can people go to learn more about you, more about
Mm-hmm.
your book? Anything you want to share
Yeah,
about that?
yeah, sure. So I am writing a workbook. It's a journal workbook that will be out in the next couple of months. It's a companion of Bent Not Broken. So Bent Not Broken is this memoir about how do you really get to wholeness. And I use my own dirty laundry in particular to illustrate, you can do it because I think it was important to be very transparent so people can be like, okay, I see. He went through some stuff. I can make it too. And so there's a companion piece that helps people kind of really for themselves uh, um, develop exercises in the actual building blocks for that personally, where they can translate it in their lives. I also, social media, Landis Graden on Instagram and Facebook, and I'm actually about to do a rebook launching because I put it out during the pandemic, but I'm going to relaunch it later this year. And I'm also having a podcast I started already recording called Bit Not Broken, and it really is also the book. And it's similar to what you're doing. It's like there's never enough. There are never enough of these to help people understand how do they get to their path. So that's coming up for me: the book, the podcast, and just re-promoting the book.
I'm happy to hear that, Landis. And obviously, I'll
Yeah,
be including all of this in the show notes
yeah.
and stuff like that because you sharing openly and you talk about the importance of vulnerability. It is because for so many men, a lot of us live in isolation. We're a little bit
Mm-hmm.
nervous about what people are going to think about us, about some of the things that we're just not so proud of doing. But when
Mm-hmm.
someone comes out and raises their hand and say like, "Hey, I did this. I'm not proud of it, but this is the direction that I'm taking my life." It's like you give
Mm-hmm.
hope. You've given so much hope. And for me as a soon to be dad, you're giving me hope that like, okay, those chapters are done. I can step into
Mm-hmm.
this chapter with wholeness, more
Mm-hmm.
healthy, and pass that along to my son and the family that I'm
Mm-hmm.
building. And so I
Mm-hmm.
thank you for just putting yourself out there
Mm-hmm.
because in you living in your purpose and your truth, it's just the overflow is coming
Mm-hmm.
to others like myself. So thank
Yeah,
you.
I'm glad. I'm glad. That's what it's for. So thanks for reading it. Thanks for sharing, and keep telling people to get on their path, man.
Totally will, totally will. And this
Yeah,
conversation is going to be a great one to put out there for folks.
yeah,
So
yeah.
everyone, that is it for today's show. I'd like to thank you all for your presence and tuning in today. If you enjoyed the show, please be sure to subscribe and by sharing the Living Once Twice podcast on Instagram, LinkedIn, or wherever, leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and also YouTube. Reaching out to you all through the time and the space that separates us to say, remember, your dream life is waiting for you. It's time to go for it. You deserve it. Catch you later on Living Once Twice.